For example 1, we're going to look at adding two negative integers, and we're going to look at it using three different methods. The first method that we're going to use will include counters. So if we're using counters, we're going to use red counters to represent negative numbers. So our first section here, that's two reds, that would represent two negatives, plus our next integer was a -4, and there's four reds, that would represent four negatives. And we could count how many negatives we have total. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total negatives. So that will leave us with a -6. For our second method, we're going to show this on a number line. And there's two ways that we could show it on a number line. So for our first method of using a number line, we're going to start at 0 and we'll go back to where our first integer is, and that's a -2, so we're going to go left 2 places. We'll draw an arrow there. So we start at -2 and we're adding a -4 to it. And again, because it is a negative, we are going to go back to the left 4 more spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4 more spaces. And that shows us a -6. The next method of using a number line, we could just start at whatever our first integer is. Our first integer here is a -2, so we'll start at the -2 and we will move left 4 spaces, and that still brings us to a -6. If we're going to use a number line to add integers, there are two basic rules that you need to follow. You move to the right or in the positive direction on a number line when you add a positive integer, and you move to the left or the negative direction on the number line when you add a negative integer. For our last method, we're going to use absolute values. So we're going to take the absolute values of each integer, and the absolute value of -2 is 2, and the absolute value of -4 is 4. Then we're going to just add 2 and 4 together to give us 6. And because both signs were negative, we could say that a -2 plus a -4 leaves us with a -6. So after you add the absolute values, you just carry the sign that is with it, which in this case was both negative. And if we're going to add integers using absolute values, which will be our most common way of doing it, when you use absolute values to add integers with the same sign, you just find the sum of their absolute values and then keep the common sign. So if you're adding two negatives together, it's always going to be a negative. If you're adding two positives together, it will always give you a positive.